The broadcast went live across 17 star systems at exactly 14:37 Galactic Standard Time. Every screen, every communication device, every neural implant in the hegemony received the signal simultaneously. What they saw would haunt the galaxy forever. Tommy Chen was 12 years old. He stood in the center of a crystalline execution chamber on the hegemony capital world of Dominion Prime, his small hands bound behind his back with energy shackles that glowed an ominous red. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but his chin was raised defiantly. Around him, the towering forms of the hegemony's ruling council watched with cold satisfaction. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their empire stretched across countless worlds, subjugating hundreds of species under their iron fist. They were ancient beings, tall as trees, with obsidian skin and eyes like burning coals. Their technology was beyond comprehension, their military unstoppable. They had never known defeat. But humanity was different. For 2 centuries, humans had been the thorns in their side. While other species bowed and submitted, humans fought back. They sabotaged hegemony installations, rescued enslaved populations, and worst of all, they inspired others to resist. The council had decided that an example needed to be made. Tommy had been captured during a raid on a human settlement on the Outer Rim. His parents had been part of a resistance cell that had successfully freed 3 cargo ships full of alien slaves bound for the mining worlds. When the hegemony forces arrived for retaliation, Tommy's parents had died defending their home. The boy had been found hiding in a storage compartment, clutching a worn photo of Earth's blue skies. High Executor Vashatar stepped forward, his voice booming across the chamber as billions watched. Citizens of the hegemony, witness what becomes of those who defy our rule. This human child represents the rebellion that has plagued our peace for too long. Let his death serve as a warning to all who would challenge our authority. Tommy looked up at the towering figure with eyes that held no fear, only anger. "My mom said you're afraid of us," he said, his young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "She said that's why you have to kill kids, because you know we're better than you." A murmur rippled through the gathered aliens in the viewing galleries. No one spoke to the High Executor like that. No one. Vashatar's eyes flared brighter. "Your species is a disease upon the galaxy, child. We are performing surgery." "Then why do you need an army to fight us?" Tommy shot back. "If we're just a disease, why are you scared?" The execution was meant to be quick. A single blast from an energy weapon, clean and efficient. But Vashatar was angry now. He gestured to his guards, and they activated pain amplifiers around the chamber. The devices were designed to enhance suffering, to make death slow and agonizing. Tommy screamed as the energy began to tear him apart at the molecular level. But even as his young body convulsed in unimaginable pain, he managed to speak one last time. "You think this will stop us? You just made us stronger. My dad told me that humans don't stay down. We get back up. And we remember." The boy's death took 7 minutes and 32 seconds. The galaxy watched every second of it. When the broadcast ended, there was silence across the 17 star systems. Then came the rage. On Earth, humanity's birth world, the news reached the Global Defense Council within minutes. President Maria Santos stood in the Situation Room, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone white. Around her, generals and admirals watched the replay in horrified silence. "How many ships do we have?" Santos asked quietly. "Ma'am, our fleet number's roughly 8,000 vessels across all classes," Admiral Chen reported. There was no relation to young Tommy, but the shared name felt like destiny now. "The hegemony has over 3 million. "I didn't ask about their ships," Santos said. "I asked about ours." Admiral Chen understood. "Every ship we have, ma'am. Every ship." Santos turned to address the room. "That boy could have been any of our children. He was brave, and he was defiant, and they tortured him to death for the entertainment of their empire. Her voice grew harder with each word. Send the recall order. Every human ship, every human soldier, every human pilot comes home. We're going to war. But it wasn't just humans who were moved by Tommy's sacrifice. On Kethvar, the reptilian Saurians watched their leader, War Master Thek, pace before the assembled military council. The Saurians had been enslaved for 800 years, forced to serve as shock troops in the hegemony's military. They had obeyed because resistance meant extinction. The human child spoke truly, Thek hissed. His scaled fists clenched. We have lived as slaves for too long. If a 12-year-old human can face death with such courage, what excuse do we have for our cowardice? Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. The insectoid Zenthari, the crystalline Vortians, the gaseous Nephili, dozens of species that had been ground under the hegemony's boot for millennia. Tommy's words had awakened something that 3,000 years of oppression had tried to bury. Hope. On the mining world of Korak's 7th, human engineer Jake Morrison watched the execution replay for the 10th time. Around him, his mixed crew of humans and aliens worked in stunned silence. Jake had been designing weapons for the Resistance for 5 years, hidden modifications to mining equipment that could punch through hegemony armor. But this changed everything. Sarah, he called to his second-in-command, a brilliant Vortian woman whose crystal body pulsed with agitated light. How long would it take to convert the entire mining complex into a weapons factory? Sarah's crystalline form shifted colors as she calculated. Working around the clock with full automation, 6 days. But Jake, the hegemony will detect the energy signatures. Good, Jake said grimly. I want them to know we're coming. The hegemony's response was swift and predictable. High Executor Vashatar appeared on communication screens across the Empire, his burning eyes filled with satisfaction. The human child's death was regrettable but necessary. Any further resistance will result in the complete extinction of the human species. We have shown mercy by targeting only one settlement. Do not test our patience further. But mercy was not what the galaxy had witnessed. They had seen a 12-year-old boy tortured to death for the crime of having courage. They had seen the true face of the empire that ruled them. Within hours, revolts began breaking out on a dozen worlds. On Sigma Draconis III, the enslaved Zenthari workers overwhelmed their hegemony overseers, using nothing but mining tools and righteous fury. On New Macedonia, human colonists emerged from hidden bunkers with weapons they'd been stockpiling for generations. On Tau Ceti, the aquatic Aquarians poisoned the water supply of the hegemony garrison, watching with satisfaction as their oppressors writhed in agony. The hegemony had made a critical error. For 3,000 years, they had ruled through fear, through the implicit threat that resistance would bring only death. But they had never before shown their cruelty so nakedly, so publicly. The execution of Tommy Chen had revealed them not as mighty gods to be feared, but as sadistic bullies who tortured children. And there was something else. Something the hegemony had never understood about humans, something that made them dangerous beyond their military capabilities or their stubborn refusal to submit. Humans were infectious. Their courage, their defiance, their absolute refusal to accept injustice, it spread to other species like a virus. For 2 centuries, they had been slowly awakening the galaxy's enslaved peoples, showing them that resistance was possible. Tommy's death had just accelerated the process exponentially. On Earth, the war preparation was unlike anything in human history. Every shipyard, every factory, every resource was devoted to the coming conflict. The planet's massive orbital installations worked day and night, turning out new vessels at an unprecedented pace. These weren't the sleek, elegant ships of the hegemony, but crude, powerful weapons designed for one purpose: to hit hard and keep fighting. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the primary research laboratory, reviewing the final specifications for humanity's newest weapon. The Prometheus-class dreadnought was a monster of a ship, built around a single massive cannon that could crack a planet's crust. It wasn't sophisticated technology, but it was devastatingly effective. "How many can we build?" President Santos asked as she reviewed the blueprints. "With current resources, maybe 50 in the next 6 months," Dr. Vasquez replied. "They're resource-intensive, but each one has the firepower of an entire hegemony battle group." Santos nodded. "Build them. Build as many as we can." But humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ships or their guns. It was their ability to inspire others. Across the galaxy, alien species were abandoning their roles as collaborators and joining the growing rebellion. The hegemony's intelligence networks were reporting uprisings on over 300 worlds, far more than their military could simultaneously suppress. High Executor Vashatar stood in his command chamber, studying reports that grew more dire by the hour. His subordinates waited nervously as he processed the scale of the rebellion. "How did this happen?" he demanded. "One human child, one execution. How has it led to this?" His intelligence chief, a spindly creature called Nexus Prime, stepped forward hesitantly. "High Executor, our analysts believe the humans have been conducting a psychological warfare campaign for decades. They have systematically undermined our authority by demonstrating that resistance is possible. And we played directly into their hands," Vashatar realized, his anger building. "The execution was meant to demonstrate our power. Instead, it revealed our weakness." "Sir, don't you understand? For 3 millennia, we have ruled through the illusion of invincibility. The moment we felt the need to publicly torture a child, we revealed our desperation. We showed the galaxy that humans frighten us." The truth was even worse than Vashatar realized. Tommy Chen's execution hadn't just inspired rebellion. It had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed the hegemony. For the first time in 3,000 years, they appeared weak, cruel, and most importantly, mortal, and humanity was coming for them. The first human strike came exactly 8 days after Tommy's death. A fleet of converted cargo ships dropped out of hyperspace around the hegemony stronghold of Zerion Station. They weren't carrying trade goods anymore. Each ship had been converted into a kinetic missile, their cargo holds packed with refined uranium and their engines rigged to overload. The station's shields absorbed the first few impacts, but 12 simultaneous strikes overwhelmed their defenses. Zerion Station, which had controlled shipping lanes for 6 sectors, was completely destroyed. The 3,000 hegemony personnel aboard died instantly. But that was just the beginning. 8 minutes after Zerion's destruction, similar attacks began across the galaxy. Human ships, alien vessels, even converted civilian craft struck hegemony installations with suicidal fury. The attacks were coordinated, simultaneous, and devastating. Within a single hour, the hegemony lost more infrastructure than they had in the previous century of resistance activity. And still, the attacks continued. Every world the hegemony ruled, every station they controlled, every symbol of their authority became a target. The galaxy's oppressed peoples had finally found their voice, and it was screaming for vengeance. Tommy Chen had been dead for 8 days. In that time, an empire that had seemed eternal had begun to crumble. The boy's final words echoed across the galaxy. Humans don't stay down. We get back up, and we remember. The hegemony was about to learn just how long human memory could be. The hegemony's first response was predictable and brutal. High Executor Vashatar ordered the complete sterilization of 3 human colonies in retaliation for the coordinated strikes. The order went out to Battle Fleet Omega, the hegemony's most feared military unit, consisting of 50 dreadnought-class warships, each capable of cracking a planet's crust. But when Battle Fleet Omega arrived at New Harmony, humanity's agricultural world in the Centauri system, they found something unexpected. The planet was empty, completely evacuated. Not just the humans, but every piece of useful technology, every grain of food, every drop of water that could be moved. They had stripped the world bare and vanished. Admiral Keth Moran, commander of the fleet, stood on his command bridge staring at the barren planet below. His species, the Dominari, had been the hegemony's military arm for 2 millennia. They were born warriors, bred for conquest, and they had never encountered anything like this. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system," his tactical officer reported. What emerged from the darkness of space defied belief. Hundreds of ships, but not the sleek vessels typically seen in space combat. These were converted asteroid miners, their hulls bristling with improvised weapons, cargo haulers with missile pods welded to their sides, even luxury yachts modified with ramming prows and loaded with explosives. Leading them was a single human dreadnought, crude and angular compared to the hegemony's elegant warships, but radiating an aura of barely contained destruction. On its hull, painted in letters a kilometer tall, were the words, "Remember Tommy Chen." Admiral Keth Moran had commanded fleets for 3 centuries. He had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and never known defeat. But looking at the approaching human fleet, he felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship," his communications officer announced. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a weathered human woman in a simple military uniform. Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation to the murdered boy despite sharing his name, looked directly into Keth Moran's eyes with an expression of absolute determination. "Admiral Keth Moran of the Dominari," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the void. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. You came here to murder civilians. Instead, you found us. We're going to give you exactly 1 chance to surrender." Keth Moran's pride flared. "Human, you face the might of 50 hegemony dreadnoughts with a collection of converted civilian vessels. Your courage is admirable, but your tactics are suicide." Admiral Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Admiral, you made one critical error. You think this is a battle. This is an execution." Before Keth Moran could respond, the human fleet opened fire. But these weren't conventional weapons. The converted miners launched clouds of metallic debris, turning the space around the hegemony fleet into a deadly maze of high-velocity fragments. The cargo haulers fired massive kinetic projectiles. Simple chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The luxury yachts did something even more terrifying. They engaged their faster-than-light drives while still in normal space, creating localized space-time distortions that wreaked havoc with the hegemony ship's shields and navigation systems. Keth Moran watched in growing horror as his mighty fleet was torn apart by improvised weapons and suicidal tactics. The humans weren't trying to win a conventional battle. They were willing to sacrifice their entire fleet to destroy his, and their crude but effective weapons were actually working. "Sir, we've lost 17 ships," his tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with panic. "The humans are ramming us with their damaged vessels." It was true. As each human ship took critical damage, instead of retreating or surrendering, it would lock onto the nearest hegemony vessel and engage maximum thrust. The explosions were spectacular and devastating. Admiral Chen's voice came through the chaos again. "You wanted to make an example of us, Admiral. Consider this lesson 1. We don't break. We break you." The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, only 3 hegemony dreadnoughts remained functional, limping away from the carnage. The entire human fleet had been destroyed, but they had taken 47 enemy ships with them. More importantly, they had sent a message that resonated across the galaxy. Humanity would not be cowed by superior numbers or technology. The news of the New Harmony battle reached every world in the galaxy within hours. The hegemony's supposedly invincible battle fleet Omega had been destroyed by converted civilian ships and human determination. The psychological impact was immense. On the industrial world of Kef Prime, the enslaved Vortian workers watched the battle footage in secret, their crystalline bodies pulsing with excitement. For 800 years, they had labored in the hegemony's factories, told that resistance was impossible. Now they had seen the impossible happen. Vortian engineer Prime Cathara stood before her fellow workers in the depths of the factory complex. "The humans show us the way," she said, her crystal form shifting to deep blue patterns of determination. "They prove that courage can overcome any technological advantage." "But we are not warriors," protested one of the younger workers. "We are builders, creators. What can we do against their weapons?" Cathara's form shifted to brilliant gold, the color of inspiration among her people. "We build. We create. But we build for ourselves now." Within days, Kef Prime's factories were producing something other than hegemony military equipment. The Vortians, master engineers all, began constructing weapons designed specifically to counter hegemony technology. They knew every weakness, every design flaw, every vulnerability in their master's equipment because they had been forced to build it for centuries. The weapons they created were elegant and devastatingly effective. Harmonic disruptors that could shatter hegemony armor by exploiting resonance frequencies. Neural scramblers that interfered with their master's implant technology. Energy vampires that could drain a warship's power core in minutes. But the Vortians weren't just building weapons, they were building something far more dangerous: hope. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. The Zenthari, the insectoid race that had served as the hegemony's shock troops, began turning their military training against their masters. The Nephili, gaseous beings who had been used as living computers, started feeding false information to hegemony command systems. The aquatic Aquarians sabotaged underwater installations that the hegemony couldn't replace. And everywhere, the name of Tommy Chen became a rallying cry. "Remember the boy?" they would whisper to each other in dozens of languages. "Remember what they did to the child?" High Executor Vashitar stood in his command chamber, reviewing reports of uprisings on over 800 worlds. His subordinates waited nervously as he processed the magnitude of the crisis. "How many ships do we have available for immediate deployment?" he asked his military commander. "Approximately 2,300,000 vessels across all classes, High Executor," came the reply. "However, we're receiving reports of sabotage and mutiny from many of our alien crew members. Operational readiness may be significantly lower." Vashitar turned to study the massive holographic display showing the galaxy's current state. Red markers indicated worlds in active rebellion. Yellow showed worlds where loyalty was questionable. Green represented worlds still firmly under hegemony control. There was too much red. Far too much red. "The humans," he said slowly. "How many ships do they actually have?" "Intelligence estimates place their total fleet strength at approximately 15,000 vessels, High Executor. However, that number is growing daily as they convert civilian craft and construct new vessels." 15,000, Vashitar mused. "We outnumber them more than 100 to 1, yet they're winning." "Sir, respectfully, I wouldn't characterize the current situation as—" "They are winning," Vashitar's voice boomed through the chamber. "They have turned half the galaxy against us with nothing but their example. One dead human child has accomplished what 3,000 years of rebellions could not." The truth was even worse than the High Executor realized. On Earth, humanity's war production had shifted into something unprecedented in galactic history. Every resource, every factory, every creative mind was devoted to a single purpose: the complete destruction of the hegemony. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the newly constructed Prometheus shipyard, watching as the latest dreadnought rolled off the production line. But these weren't the same crude vessels from just weeks ago. Human engineering, driven by necessity and fueled by rage, was advancing at an incredible pace. "How many ships are we producing now?" asked General Morrison, who had arrived to inspect the latest designs. 6 dreadnoughts per day from this facility alone, Dr. Vasquez replied. "We have 17 facilities like this one running at full capacity, plus thousands of smaller shipyards producing frigates, destroyers, and support vessels." "And the new technology?" Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. "We're not just building ships, General. We're building nightmares. The quantum torpedoes can phase through any known shield technology. The gravity bombs can turn a star system into a black hole. And the neural disruptors—" She paused. "Let's just say that facing humans in battle is about to become every alien's worst nightmare. But humanity's greatest weapon was still their ability to inspire others. The galaxy's oppressed peoples weren't just rebelling randomly anymore. They were coordinating, communicating, planning joint operations that struck at the heart of hegemony power. On the hegemony's secondary capital world of Throne Prime, a mixed team of human commandos and alien rebels infiltrated the Central Command facility. Their target wasn't military intelligence or weapon systems. It was something far more valuable: the hegemony's historical archives. Captain Jack Hunter led the team through the facility's corridors, his experience as a former hegemony prisoner serving him well in navigating their security systems. Beside him moved Thek, the Saurian war master who had abandoned his post to join the rebellion. "The archives are through here," Thek hissed quietly. "But, human captain, why do we risk so much for old information?" "Because information is power, War Master," Hunter replied. "The hegemony has ruled for 3,000 years by controlling what people know about their past. We're going to change that." What they found in the archives shocked even the cynical human captain. The hegemony hadn't just conquered the galaxy's species, they had systematically erased their histories, their cultures, their knowledge of their own capabilities. Thousands of races had been reduced to slaves not through superior military might alone, but through deliberate cultural genocide. "My people," Thek breathed, staring at records of the Saurian civilization. "We were explorers, scientists. We mapped the galaxy's hyperspace routes. His voice broke. "We were more than soldiers." Hunter placed a hand on the alien warrior's scaled shoulder. "You still are, and now everyone's going to know it." The data theft from Throne Prime proved to be another turning point in the growing rebellion. When the stolen historical records were broadcast across the galaxy, every enslaved species learned the truth about their origins. The Zenthari discovered they had once been the galaxy's greatest artists, creating living sculptures from light itself. The Aquarians learned they had been master diplomats, maintaining peace between hundreds of worlds through careful negotiation. Most importantly, they learned that they had all been defeated not through honest conquest, but through treachery, betrayal, and systematic cultural destruction. The rage that followed made humanity's anger seem mild by comparison. On Nexus Station, the hegemony's primary military command center, Admiral Kethmaran met with the surviving commanders of what had once been the galaxy's most feared military force. The reports they brought painted a picture of complete systemic collapse. "Sector 7 has fallen completely," reported Admiral Vexhai of the Third Fleet. "The combined human and Zenthari forces have captured every installation from here to the galactic rim. Sector 12 is under siege," added Admiral Mordak. "The Vortian rebels have somehow developed shield technology that our weapons cannot penetrate." "And Sector 4? Kethmaran asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Kethmoran turned to the massive display showing the galaxy's current military situation. What had been an empire just months ago was now a scattered collection of isolated strongholds, surrounded by a sea of red markers indicating hostile forces. "How many worlds do we still control?" he asked. 47 confirmed loyal worlds, sir. Another 93 with questionable status. From over 10,000 worlds to less than 50 in 2 months. The greatest empire in galactic history was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. And the humans? Intelligence indicates they're massing their main fleet for an assault on Dominion Prime itself. Estimated strength, over 100,000 vessels and growing. Kethmoran closed his eyes. 100,000 ships crewed by humans and their growing number of alien allies, all united by their hatred for the hegemony and their memory of a 12-year-old boy who had died rather than submit. "Sir," one of his subordinates ventured quietly, "perhaps it's time to consider negotiating a—" "No." The voice belonged to High Executor Vashitar, who had arrived unannounced. "There will be no surrender, no negotiation. If we fall fighting." Kethmoran turned to face his supreme commander. "High Executor, respectfully, continuing this war may result in the complete extinction of our species." Vashitar's burning eyes fixed on the admiral. "Better extinction than submission to humans and their pet races. We have ruled this galaxy for 3 millennia. We will not be brought down by the death of one human child." But even as he spoke, Vashitar knew the truth. They hadn't just been brought down by Tommy Chen's death. They had been brought down by their response to it. By torturing a child for the galaxy to see, they had revealed themselves as monsters rather than gods. And monsters, the galaxy had learned, could be killed. The final assault on the hegemony's core worlds was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. Across the galaxy, the largest military force in history was converging on Dominion Prime. Humans, Saurians, Zenthari, Vortians, Aquarians, and dozens of other species, all united in their determination to end 3,000 years of oppression. Tommy Chen had been dead for exactly 2 months. In that time, an empire that had seemed eternal had been reduced to a handful of desperate holdouts. The boy's sacrifice had lit a fire that was now consuming everything the hegemony had built. As Admiral Chen had promised, humans didn't stay down. They got back up, and they remembered. The Battle of Dominion Prime began at dawn on the galaxy's oldest world. The hegemony's capital planet hung like a dark jewel against the star-filled void, its surface covered with the towering spires and magnificent architecture of 3,000 years of absolute rule. Ancient shields protected the world, energy barriers that had never been breached by any enemy force in recorded history. They lasted exactly 17 minutes against the combined fury of the galaxy's liberated peoples. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful dreadnought. Around her ship, the largest military fleet in galactic history stretched into the distance like a metallic constellation. 130,000 vessels from dozens of species, all flying under the banner of the newly formed Galactic Liberation Alliance. But it wasn't the size of the fleet that would have terrified the hegemony's defenders. It was their composition. These weren't the professional military forces that the hegemony had spent millennia learning to fight. These were farmers in converted tractors, miners in armed ore haulers, teachers in retrofitted school transports. Every ship carried beings who had lost family, friends, entire cultures to the hegemony's oppression. And every single vessel bore the same marking painted on its hull. "Remember Tommy Chen." "Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 46 hegemony installations in the outer system," reported her communications officer. "They're requesting safe passage for non-combatant personnel." Chen nodded. Despite their rage, the Alliance had maintained strict rules of engagement. Non-combatants would be protected. Prisoners would be treated humanely. They would not become the monsters they were fighting against. "Grant safe passage to all non-combatants who surrender immediately," she ordered. "But make it clear that any facility or ship that continues to resist will be destroyed without further warning." The response was immediate. Dozens of hegemony installations lowered their shields and transmitted surrender codes. Their crews, mostly alien slaves forced to serve the Dominari ruling class, abandoned their posts and fled toward the Alliance fleet in whatever ships they could find. But not everyone was surrendering. The planet's surface bristled with massive defense installations, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. In the planet's core, the hegemony's last great weapon was powering up, the Omega device, a planet killer that could destroy entire solar systems by destabilizing their central stars. High Executor Vashatar stood in his command bunker 5 kilometers beneath Dominion Prime's surface, watching the tactical displays show the approaching Alliance fleet. His remaining advisors huddled around him, their confidence finally broken after months of unrelenting defeats. "High Executor, the outer defenses have fallen," reported his military aide. "The Alliance fleet has broken through all 4 shield layers." "And the Omega device?" "Charging as ordered, sir. Full power in approximately 1 hour." Vashatar nodded grimly. If the hegemony was to fall, they would take as much of the galaxy with them as possible. The Omega device would destroy the Dominion system's star, creating a supernova that would sterilize dozens of nearby systems. Billions would die, but the human-led Alliance would learn the cost of destroying the galaxy's rightful rulers. "Sir?" Another aide ventured hesitantly. "The device will also destroy us. Perhaps if we—" "There is no perhaps," Vashatar cut him off. "We die here, or we die at the hands of human executioners. At least this way, we choose the manner of our ending." But the Alliance had anticipated this final desperate act. Intelligence gathered from captured hegemony facilities had revealed the existence of the Omega device, and humanity's scientists had been working frantically to develop countermeasures. Dr. Elena Vasquez floated in the zero gravity of her laboratory ship, the UES Prometheus, making final adjustments to humanity's most ambitious project yet. The stellar stabilizer was theoretical technology made real through desperate necessity, a device capable of reinforcing a star's magnetic field and preventing artificial destabilization. "Elena, how long do you need?" Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. 20 minutes to deploy and activate," Vasquez replied, sweat beading on her forehead despite the ship's climate control. "But we need to get within 50,000 kilometers of the star to make it work. Through an entire hegemony defense fleet? Through whatever it takes. Because if we don't stop that device, they'll turn their star into a weapon that kills half the galaxy." Admiral Chen understood. "Copy that, Doctor. We'll get you there." What followed was the most vicious space battle in galactic history. The Alliance fleet punched through layer after layer of hegemony defenses, paying a terrible price in ships and lives for every kilometer gained. Human vessels rammed hegemony dreadnoughts, sacrificing themselves to clear paths for their allies. Xanthari fighters swarmed enemy formations in suicidal attacks that ignored their own survival. Vortian ships used their superior engineering to create temporary wormholes that allowed Alliance forces to appear behind enemy lines. The Prometheus, protected by a screen of the Alliance's most powerful warships, fought its way toward Dominion Prime's star. Every second counted as the Omega device continued charging in the planet's depths. On the surface of Dominion Prime, something unexpected was happening. The planet's enslaved population, mostly members of conquered species forced to serve the hegemony elite, had risen in revolt. Inspired by news of the Alliance's approach and armed with weapons smuggled in by advance teams, they were attacking the very defense installations that protected their oppressors. Thek, The Saurian war master, who had abandoned his hegemony commission, led a mixed force of rebels through the capital city's ancient streets. Beside him fought humans, Zenthari, Aquarians, and dozens of other species, all united in their determination to prevent the Omega device from firing. "The main power relay is 3 blocks ahead," shouted Dr. Keltar, a Vortian engineer whose crystal body pulsed with determination. "If we can overload it, we might be able to delay the device long enough for the fleet to stop it." Thek nodded, his massive claws gripping a human-made plasma rifle. "Then we fight through whatever stands in our way." The hegemony's elite guard, the Dominari Immortals, met them at the power station. These were the hegemony's finest warriors, genetically enhanced soldiers who had never known defeat. They stood 3 meters tall, their obsidian armor reflecting the fires of the burning city around them. The battle was brutal and personal. Hand-to-hand combat in the shadow of towering alien architecture, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Human commandos used their smaller size and agility to slip past the Immortals' defenses. Saurian warriors matched the Dominari in size and strength. Zenthari swarms overwhelmed individual enemies through sheer numbers. And in the end, it was a 12-year-old Vortian child who made the difference. Shannara, barely old enough to understand the significance of her actions, slipped through the chaos of battle and reached the power relay's control panel. Her crystalline fingers, small enough to access maintenance ports that adults couldn't reach, rewired the system according to instructions she had memorized from Dr. Keltar. The power station exploded in a cascade of brilliant energy, sending feedback surges throughout the city's power grid. The Omega device's charging sequence faltered, buying precious minutes for the space battle raging overhead. In space, the Prometheus had finally reached its destination. Dr. Vasquez initiated the Stellar Stabilizer's deployment sequence, launching thousands of specialized probes toward Dominion Prime's star. Each probe carried a piece of the stabilization matrix, and together they would form a protective net around the star itself. "Deployment successful," she reported. "Activation in 30 seconds. But the hegemony had one last card to play. High Executor Vasha Tar, realizing that his Omega device might fail, personally took control of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion. The ship emerged from its hiding place behind Dominion Prime's largest moon and set course directly for the Prometheus. "This is High Executor Vasha Tar," his voice boomed across all communication channels. "I will not permit human technology to interfere with our righteous ending. Face me, Admiral Chen, if you have the courage." Admiral Chen didn't hesitate. The UES Defiance broke formation and accelerated toward the enemy flagship, its weapons charging for what would likely be the final engagement of the war. The two ships met in the space between Dominion Prime and its star, their weapons lighting up the void with brilliant displays of destructive energy. The Eternal Dominion was larger and more heavily armed, but the Defiance had something more valuable, a crew that was fighting for something greater than themselves. "All batteries, target their primary weapons," Chen ordered. "We don't need to destroy them. We just need to keep them busy until the stabilizer activates." The battle was fierce but brief. Human gunnery, perfected through months of desperate combat, found weak points in the hegemony flagship's armor. Quantum torpedoes phased through shields to strike critical systems. Gravity bombs created localized distortions that wreaked havoc with the enemy ship's structural integrity. But it was a human invention that ended the fight: the neural disruptor. Dr. Vasquez's final gift to the war effort sent cascading waves of energy that interfered with the Dominari's cybernetic implants. For the first time in their lives, the hegemony's ruling class experienced fear, confusion, and doubt without their technological enhancements to suppress these emotions. High Executor Vashitar, his implants sparking and failing, collapsed to the deck of his command bridge as human emotions flooded through his consciousness. For 3,000 years, his people had used technology to suppress empathy, compassion, and mercy. Now, suddenly vulnerable to the full range of sentient emotion, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of suffering his empire had caused. "The children," he whispered, his burning eyes dimming as true comprehension dawned. "All the children we killed, all the worlds we destroyed, what have we become?" The Eternal Dominion's surrender came moments before the stellar stabilizer activated. Across the star system, the device's energy matrix formed a protective barrier around the star itself, making it impossible for any weapon to destabilize its fusion reactions. The Omega device, still charging in Dominion Prime's depths, fired into empty space as its targeting systems failed to lock onto the now protected star. The shot that was meant to destroy half the galaxy instead vanished harmlessly into interstellar space. On the surface of Dominion Prime, the remaining hegemony forces laid down their weapons as word of their leader's surrender spread. The 3,000-year-old empire had finally fallen, not to superior technology or overwhelming force, but to the simple courage of a 12-year-old boy who had refused to bow to tyranny. Thek stood in the ruins of the power station, his scaled hands resting on the shoulders of young Shannara. Around them, rebels from dozens of species embraced each other in victory and relief. The boy would have been proud, the Saurian War Master rumbled quietly. "He knew," Shannara replied, her crystal form pulsing with soft blue light. "Somehow, he knew that his courage would free us all." In the months that followed, the galaxy began the long process of healing. The Galactic Liberation Alliance transformed into the Galactic Republic, a democratic federation where every species had an equal voice. The hegemony's advanced technology was shared freely among all peoples, ending the artificial scarcity that had kept so many worlds in poverty. Former hegemony officials who surrendered were treated fairly but firmly. Those guilty of war crimes faced justice, while those who had been forced to serve were offered chances at redemption. Many former Dominari, stripped of the implants that had suppressed their emotions, became powerful advocates for peace and reconciliation. High Executor Vashitar, now simply called Vash, spent his remaining years traveling the galaxy and speaking to young people about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of empathy. His testimony helped establish the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights, which guaranteed basic freedoms to all intelligent life in the galaxy. But perhaps the most important change was the establishment of Tommy Chen Memorial Day, observed annually throughout the galaxy. On this day, beings of all species would gather to remember not just the boy who had died, but all those who had suffered under tyranny, and they would renew their commitment to ensuring that such suffering never happened again. Admiral Sarah Chen, now serving as the first president of the Galactic Republic, stood before the memorial statue erected on Earth in Tommy's honor. The statue showed a young boy with his chin raised defiantly, facing down oppression with nothing but courage and the unshakable belief that right would triumph over might. Carved into the base were his final words: "Humans don't stay down. We get back up, and we remember." But below that, the memorial builders had added one more line: "And we ensure that no child ever faces such darkness alone again." The galaxy had learned many lessons from the hegemony war: the importance of standing up to bullies, the power of unity among diverse peoples, the necessity of protecting the innocent and defending the defenseless. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: that courage, once ignited, spreads like fire through the darkness. One brave child had lit that fire, and it had burned away 3,000 years of oppression. Tommy Chen had been 12 years old when they killed him. He had been afraid, alone, and facing impossible odds. But he had not broken. He had not begged. He had not given his torturers the satisfaction of seeing him submit. Instead, he had looked into their cameras and reminded the galaxy of something they had forgotten, that some things are worth dying for, and that even the smallest voice can echo across the stars if it speaks truth with sufficient courage. The boy was dead, but his words lived on. And in a galaxy finally free from the shadow of tyranny, every child could grow up knowing that they too could make a difference if they had the courage to stand for what was right. The hegemony had killed a boy for the galaxy to see. But in doing so, they had awakened something far more powerful than any weapon or fleet, the indomitable spirit of beings who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Within 8 minutes of Tommy's death, the first shots of rebellion had been fired. Within 8 hours, revolts had begun on dozens of worlds. Within 8 days, the hegemony's military forces were in full retreat. And within 8 months, every planet they had ruled was free. They had killed a boy. But the boy had killed an empire. The galaxy remembered. The galaxy endured. And the galaxy was finally truly free.